And then where a lot of people struggle in music is the thing that comes next, because they just get stuck in that loop of the same thing.
To cause our speakers to malfunction, what is your favorite trick for bass processing or sound design in general that you've been using lately?
Bass or sub, or just in general?
In general, anything bass.
Okay. So in Serum, I've been messing around with a lot of like layering other fundamentals. So like you'll let's say you have like a saw wave in A, and then you put like a sine wave in B, but put it up 7 semitones, and then do a little FM from B. It almost like automatically layers the two things together because they're hitting different note frequencies. Yeah. That's pretty cool. But I'd say in every song I have, like literally every song on at least one of my bass channels, there's a glue compressor with like a little bit of gain reduction, soft clipping on. There's a saturator that I just like adjust, drive, and whatever else to taste. Usually a reverb that I automate like the tails a little bit. Yeah, I'd say saturator and glue compressor, I literally put on every bass patch that I have, minus like the sub. I like Redux a lot. I learned that from like, I think it was Peekaboo and G-Rex, not like Redux, but how they layer like subs with Redux on top. I just experiment with like a sub and then different 1 to 3 top layers. And there's like a very specific sound that like, I don't even know how you would make it on every sound, but as soon as you hear it, you're like, oh, that's that sound. It's like that. It sounds like, to me, it sounds like somebody like whine yelling, like a monster who just got like, you're in like a movie, somebody shot the monster and he's like, that sound. I love that sound. I don't know why.
Do you want to elaborate a bit on that reverb point? Because I feel like that's something a lot of people don't think about. Okay,
so I work in audio a lot. Whether or not I write the bass in MIDI and then bounce to audio or whatever, generally when I'm like actually sequencing a drop, I got my drums and then I have a bass. I have 2 bass channels usually. One is like the main bass sound. The other channel is like the response or the fills or just something other than the main one. And for a while when I started, I was just sequencing it and then like filling it in with all kinds of ear candy and whatever, because I was like, it feels empty. It feels like there's too much space in between things. And then I was like, wait a minute. I listened to a bunch of other songs and was like, okay, it sounds like there's reverb. Like if you listen to certain like songs by, I don't know, ill.Gates, Space Nectar, Noisia, whatever, sometimes you're like, oh, that seems like it would be so easy to make. I just need to figure out how to make the sound. But the reason that it sounds so good, so simple, is because the space is filled out by things like reverb, delay, and not just other instruments and sounds. So with the reverb, what you can do is, let's say you have like, you know, you got your build and then on the one, there's like a huge bass hit. And then on the snare, like the sub comes in or something. When the huge bass hit happens on the one, you don't want the reverb at the beginning, but like towards the end of that audio clip, adjust the reverb however you want, but like automate it so that it's fully wet or, you know, 70%, and let that drag out a little bit and then high pass that reverb. And then when the bass hits, it's not just like a bass sound and then dead space immediately after. Then it like has a tail to carry into the snare. And now you didn't need to put a new sound there. It's just like the continuation of your sound. Basically, put a reverb on your basses if you want to fill out the space.
Yeah. No, I think that's super smart. I think that one, like to that point exactly, like one thing people don't think about when you have empty space in your song and you're like, how do I fill it? Like the first thing is like, what do I add? And like, what do I add is actually like really like not the right way to think about almost anything in electronic music production. Once you have the main things that are good. Once you have like the main things that are good, that like if the song had nothing else like that, like these things by itself would like accomplish what you were trying to do. Try and figure out unique ways to use those things to fill the space. Use those things to make your effects risers. That's like one thing that I realized, like, holy shit, this is like so simple. Take that big long resample that you did, pick a chunk that you didn't use for your main bass riff that sounds kind of similar to your main bass riff because it's like something that you resampled with it, and then just draw fade, add a bunch of reverb. Like there's your effects riser that A is unique to that song and B fits the texture of the song so much better. Same thing with like using like a little bass shot and like just washing it with a bunch of reverb and like making like the background like atmosphere or whatever. Using the main things that you've already had that you like to create the rest of the stuff that you know that you're going to need just ends up like you just end up with a way more cohesive project.
For sure. I have a comment on that actually. So two things. One, as far as reusing sounds, if you listen to, by stats, what is my best song? Unknow, the one that's been played the most. If you listen to the drop and then you start at the intro, you will note it, if you pay attention, it is the exact same drop that is far away rack in. And I think I changed 2 notes to like make it make sense.
Yeah.
But I literally copy pasted it over and then far away racked it in and, added some percussion and the vocals or whatever. But, and then the second point, I found my music making slowed down way more the larger my sample library got. And the reason is what you were talking about. As soon as you get stuck, if you're like, all right, what do I add? You start digging. A, you're digging now, which is a waste of time. You could be writing. B, you're going to add things that may or may not be cohesive. What really helped me and also will make your drops or just the song in general more cohesive. You mentioned using the same fill multiple times might get uninteresting or whatever. Tesco. Mm-hmm. What I like to do is I'll either it's a bass note on the 1 or a fill on the 4 or whatever. I'll pick one that I think sounds awesome. Then I'll use that for like the bar 8 fill. Then for the bar 16 fill, I'll duplicate that over and then through one of various means, whether or not it's an auto filter to give it different rhythm, reverse it, stretch it, pitch it up, and like however you want to change it so that it's the same sound but different. I literally just do that 3 extra times. So now you got your 4 fills. I just do that all throughout every song. If you listen to my music, specifically Unknow, that's a really good example. 80% of the bass sounds in that song are the exact same like 4-bar sound that I've just changed. And I can just change indefinitely with pitch bends, reverse, stretch, whatever the hell. I realized after trying to put too many things in my songs, because Dylan and other producers who I respect have been like, dude, you got to chill out with, some people call it layer cake. It's just too many sounds. Just pick like, I start most songs with one sound that I really like. And I'm like, all right, there's the song. And then I just change that a few times to give it variety so it's not stale. And that's like it. I just like pick the sound you like, write a couple bar riff with it, and then like your song is done. It's obviously not done, but like you should have a theme by then. And then everything else, like you can add your ear candy, but you need the central theme. And the easiest way to do that is to use the least amount of sounds possible and just vary them. And then everything else is just, drums or whatever the hell you want.
Totally. I always explain that to people by saying too, it's like if, like I've been hanging with Evan and Luke here for a while now, and it's like the longer you get to know somebody or like a significant other especially, right? You guys are put into different situations and you see how people react in different situations, and you get this multi-dimensional perspective on their personality. It's the same with the sounds. It's like if you're doing 8 different sounds, that's one dimension for 8 different things. But if you can stretch one sound 8 different ways, now it's like seeing, a human being happy, sad, excited, through these different emotions, and you get more attached to that person that way than if you were to just see one side of 8 people. They're sort of shallow relationships.
Well, I hadn't thought of it like that. That's actually super smart. Like people, like you love, like in a live setting, especially, like you love hearing the same thing, like, and you almost expected it to be the same, but it's like just different enough that you like you know for a fact that it's an iteration that is like one step cooler.
Yeah.
And you're like, fuck, this is sick. You know, like if it just changed completely, you'd be like, oh, this is like, it's a different thing. Now I have to recontextualize this, you know?
So that totally reminds me, Alex, we had a conversation like maybe a year and a half ago where you mentioned you think of your sounds as being like Mortal Kombat characters or something.
Oh, dude,
and you think of like the uppercut and the kick or whatever. Yeah. And I've always told people like, if you're making dubstep, think of Excision or whatever. Sure, we'll go with the dinosaur analogy. A dinosaur roars, it stomps, it smashes things with its tail, whatever. And if you think abstractly as far as the type of movements or characteristics it have, you can sort of make connections with like stereo width or, you know, LFO or stuff like that. I think you want to go into that a bit? I think that'd be really valuable.
The easiest way to explain, I think, what you just described, for me, it's in certain songs. It's probably in every song, but specifically the songs that aren't just like a rolling sub. The idea of call and response in music, I'm just going to do like the Unkno riff. It's like, bum, 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 it's like the exact same thing, but the end changes. Basically, whenever a one hits, for the most part, you have like something that happens. And then where a lot of people struggle in music is the thing that comes next, because they just get stuck in that loop of the same thing. I like to think of certain sounds as, whether it be like monsters. I don't know if you guys ever played StarCraft. There's this thing called, I think, a Taurus. It's like a giant elephant with like blade tusks. It's like bigger than buildings, right? If when you're writing like a really crazy heavy song with like wild bass sounds, you picture yourself as that thing. And then you're like, here's one bass sound. That's like his like big swipe or whatever. And then you're like, all right, well now the enemy needs to like fire back. So then there comes your next sound. Or just, two people fighting. It's like, you throw your kick, they throw their punch, and it's just like, it's the talking back and forth, because without the response, it's really hard to write interesting music, in my opinion. Like, it has to have a response, whether it's a vocal, another bass sound, a drum hit, whatever.
You mentioned something dope about predictability there, like having not predictable music, but predictable moments when something cool is going to happen for the listener.
Oh,
like on the one, the big 808 blasts.
Yeah.
And then on the snare, we get those short shots of high sounds.
Yeah.
And every time it comes around, it's articulated slightly differently, but having those moments where the person who's listening knows to expect something.
Yeah, a lot of the time you need familiarity with variety. Like, it needs to be slightly familiar to whatever came before it, at least when like writing sections, but it needs to be different.
Exactly. That's
no, go ahead.
Goddamn Zoom. I was just gonna say that like is exactly like what Tesco made me realize about like it's way cooler to hear like the next iteration of something you already thought was cool. Like the context of like already getting this bit and then hearing like another take on it is like, it's just more satisfying to the listener than playing like a screechy sound and then a growly sound like in the same place. Like it just doesn't make quite as much sense.
That goes back to doing one thing well. The reason you can do one thing well is you do the one thing well and then you vary it a little bit, but it's still just the one thing, and you just like it's like the progression of music. Mm-hmm. The other thing about fills, let's say you use your one fill for bar 4, then another one for 8, etc., like every 4 bars. There's like different kinds of fills too. To me, like the way I visualize it in my head, there's like your initial fill, which is like the first time it happens. Then usually at the halfway point, so like the second fill, there's fills that like stop momentum. There's fills that like carry momentum forward. There's like different kinds of fills, and you need to make sure that each one of those four, because you know most things are in fours, are the appropriate kind. Because if you have like a momentum stopping thing at the halfway point, if there's not a huge change afterwards, it just makes no sense, like to your ears.
Yeah.
Totally. And I never studied any of this. Like the drums I played in school was just like, you know, concert band, marching band, like the stuff you play as a kid, right? But the way I learned how to produce music was way before I ever started producing music. It was from playing fucking System of a Down 24 hours a day on my Walkman at the bus stop and hearing like the exciting part of the song is like da-na-na-na-na, and then when the fill happens, you hear it and you're like, okay, now the next one needs to be like even cooler. And if it's not, you're like, I don't like this song. And then like you go to the next song. It's all of my music knowledge literally came from listening to like, it's not metal, whatever, like angsty teenager music. That's how I learned how to write music, is just listening to that like a lot.
Dude, love it. Real. I love that you mentioned that, because like even System of a Down self-admittedly will say that their arrangements are not like progressive metal. They're not even metal. They are pop arrangements that they have put in like really cool chunky riffs and like interesting textures and sonics and chords and rhythms and stuff. But there's so much to be learned from that. Like the way that they like transition between like high energy to low energy, like you would never expect that you could do that with your own music. But like System of a Down is a perfect example of going going from 1% to 100% on purpose, because the contrast that you can get when you do stuff like that is so powerful. And there is no rules that says you can't do that. Like people just assume like, oh, that's jarring. Like, dude, like if you do it right, like it's really fucking cool.
There's actually a hilarious example I have for you. I'm trying to remember the name of the song. It, hysterically enough, is a Nickelback song. I know everybody loves to hate on them. I am not like personally a fan, but this one song kind of reminds me of like a drum and bass song, like its energy. But the fills that they have like perfectly illustrate what I'm talking about. I just need to figure out what it's called. It's just like a very energetic song. Most rock bands or metal bands and stuff like that, a lot of their fills are drums, because like a drummer's actually playing it. The cool thing about electronic music is you don't need to use drums for fills. You can, it's dope and it's easy for rhythm. But like I just use high pass basses and shit all the time as fills. Like those like sucking sounds. It's like a sound that looks like a log curve, kind of like a reverse hi-hat, but with a bass sound.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like sucking into drums makes the next drum hit super hard. Yeah. I do that a lot of the time.
Well, you find that song. That's really people, when you resample a bunch of cool basses for yourself, doing your mud pies, take one of them that you didn't use in your bass riff and literally just draw like a sustained bass that lasts 2 beats and draw a volume fade on it. Like couldn't be simpler. And there is your perfect, unique, cool sweep into the next section. Stop grabbing that drum roll that doesn't fit the texture of your song at all.
Totally. One
And
thing,
also,
Dylan. Sorry, Luke. I was just gonna say. Okay, go for it. Fucking Zoom lag.
Zoom lag. I was gonna say that just brings back your point of working in audio. If you try and keep all your basses in MIDI, you don't get to just look at the waveform and be like, oh, like if I reverse that, it'll like fit right there as a turnaround. Or if I can just draw a quick automation on this wave. And it's such a good point to make to a lot of new producers. I know myself, I used to stick in my MIDI so long when I was new. And now it's like, man, MIDI is great. It's a great way to get to audio fast.
Totally. One thing I want to quote you on, Luke, Trap Jesus, EDM Lations 113, you said, everybody loves to get up and everybody loves to get down. And if you can incorporate that into your turnarounds, like fills, whatever, you can really ensure that, like, because I've always seen the main motif as like this very straight thing. Even if there's like a rising motion to it, always at the end of the phrase, you want to punctuate it by either some sort of like up or down motion. If your fill is like totally horizontal as well, the energy just sort of starts to feel stale. So thinking of it from that perspective, make it go up or down. Bam.
Okay, what you just described, you said like horizontal versus vertical drum fills. The horizontal drum fill is what I would use at the halfway point to keep it going, like to keep the energy moving. The vertical one is like the slow down one. That's a good example.
Totally.
Did you find your Nickelback song?
I couldn't find it might not be them. I swear it's them. I just can't find it. Another dude, Disturbed, Seven Dust, Mudvayne, just all of the old whatever. Yes. If you listen to their fills, it will like open your mind to what you're supposed to put where in electronic music. I don't know how to describe it.
I love it.
I like it.